being crazy and acting a fool. Why don't we do it? The difference was, even though there were a lot of crazy white hippies, there were enough of them around that wanted or had a plan. They felt disenchanted with the status quo, with the establishment, with the Vietnam War, so on, etc. Blacks, not really. They just kind of connected to that movement because they saw that it could work. They saw, or we saw, that we could get attention. But today we're in the same predicament. A lot of rioting, and the black community is precipitously on the decline in every way, shape, and form. Financially, morally, spiritually, you name it. So it hasn't worked. But I think this is something that we need to understand, because we need to be able to combat this nonsense of black rioting. Because all it does is it destroys the black community. So these are our demons. The study I read said the movement gave rise to new black artists and intellectuals, but it left poverty in its wake and played into leftist hands. And that's where Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven came in, who were white communists. I believe they were at Columbia University, if I'm not mistaken. And they capitalized on this new blackness by encouraging black women to seek welfare aggressively. See, they had a plan. Blacks were being used by the left. Sadly, the study says black protesters exchanged their clever prose and picket signs for prosperity, or at the expense of prosperity. Now here are the consequences of the riots. High unemployment, decreased property values, more welfare recipients, businesses left the communities, and new businesses refused to come in. Does that sound familiar? It's the same thing going on today. Nothing has changed. Now, I want to get to defeating Democrats. So we talked about the demons. We talked about the breakup of the family. We talked about abortion. We talked about rioting and violence. Now let's give you some history. And I'm just going to go through these as quickly as I possibly can. And I was trying to pick out just a few that were very important, but they're all really important. So I'm going to break this down to you. And by the way, you can find this information on my website, carljacksonshow.com. Click on No Mo, and I encourage No Mo. All right, I know that sounds funny, but No Mo stands for No Mo White Guilt. Okay, so you can click on No Mo at the top, and I encourage you to do so and print this out so that you'll have this information in the future. Let's start with number one. The Republican Party is formed to stop the spread of slavery and polygamy. 1854, the GOP opposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act to spread the institution of slavery. 1861, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the first Republican president. See, it's important to know these two facts above, that the Republican Party was formed to stop the spread of slavery and polygamy. I think even before you introduce Abraham Lincoln. And then make sure when you introduce Abraham Lincoln, you tell people that he was a Republican. Because I guarantee you, it's a sad fact, many people that I speak to, unless I'm at a Lincoln Day dinner, don't know that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican president. It's astonishing. And it never ceases to amaze me. Especially when I'm talking to black youth. They trip out that a Republican was the one that freed the slaves. Sounds funny, but it's true. See, I think we think of all these grandiose plans, and we neglect the fact that sometimes simple conversations with our neighbors are the ones to have. And I'll explain why that's going to be the most effective in abolishing racism in America. At least close to. We want to abolish racism until we get to heaven. But we can do better, and the right should do better, and we can do definitely better than the racist Democrats. And I do believe Democrats are racist, even by default. 1863, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. The same year, Republican Congress passes and ratifies the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolishes slavery in the U.S. forever. 1866. This is an important number to remember. 1866. Think of demons. 666. No, that sounds crazy, but think of this. 1866. Republican Congress passes the Civil Rights Act of 1866 to protect the rights of newly freed slaves. I'm always astonished when I ask whether it's conservatives or Democrats, when was the first Civil Rights Act passed? 1964. Like, no, that was the third one. You're almost 100 years late. The Republicans beat you to it 100 years ago. This is information that you got to have. 1868, the GOP Congress passes and ratifies the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, recognizing the right of newly freed slaves to be U.S. citizens. 1870, Republican Congress passes and ratifies the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which recognizes the right to vote for former slaves and citizens. I just saw an ad played the other day by a black organization that said, our voting, we just celebrated 55 years of being able to vote as blacks in America. You see what the left has done? They're evil. They are evil. There's no other way to explain it. 1871, the Republican Congress passes the Civil Rights Act of 1871, and also known as the Anti-KKK Act, to abolish the Ku Klux Klan. In 1875, the Republican Congress passes the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which is the first anti-discrimination law in the USA. 1922, Republican Leonidas Dyer passes one of the first anti-lynching bills. 1957, Dwight Eisenhower passes through the Congress the first civil rights law in 82 years, the Civil Rights Act of 1957, creating a Commission on Civil Rights. 1960, Republican Dwight Eisenhower passes the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which sent federal inspectors to the voter registration polls. So no intimidation by liberals, basically. 1964, 83% of Republicans vote to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, anti-discrimination law, and only 63% of Democrats voted for the law. Honestly, I think that's pretty good for the KKK. So that's pretty good. 1969, this is one that a lot of people don't know. 1969, Republican Richard Nixon and Art Fletcher actually worked on and passed affirmative action. Now, it was based on merit and not quotas. So the liberals got a hold of that, and they started basing it on quotas rather than merits. At the time, I think it was a decent, in American history, I think it was a decent piece of legislation. Affirmative action today is just crazy, ludicrous. We shouldn't have it. In 1983, Republican President Ronald Reagan made this is for when every time a liberal says, well, what are conservatives and or what are Republicans? Now, I understand a lot of the Republicans today stink, okay? But in general, as a Republican myself, as a conservative Republican, I don't see a need to back away from the Republican Party. What I see a need to do is to strengthen it. What I see a need to do is say, okay, this is what we're for. So whenever a liberal says, okay, well, what have you done for me lately? Okay, 1983. It was Ronald Reagan who made Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a holiday. What about, that was still a long time ago. Okay, 2001 to 2008, George W. Bush appointed more blacks to high-level positions and spent more money on education, job training, and health care for the poor and minorities than any president in American history. Now, we all know that George Bush spent like a sober liberal. But, nevertheless, this is something that he accomplished. Whether we like it or not, he wasn't a racist. In 2011, Republican Congress votes to refund the D.C. Schools Voucher Program, which allows underprivileged minorities to attend top private schools in the area after Democrat President Obama, Democrat Senate Majority Leader, killed the funding of the program to appease their union donors. So this was as early as 2011. I want to go on to this D.C. Voucher Program. So this was the program that President Obama tried to kill, and you need to ask yourself why. This is why you have to defeat Democrats. You want to help blacks? You defeat Democrats. You help blacks see their demons. You help blacks see the evil that has been hoisted upon them by the left. And then you help them to defeat their demons, and you help them to defeat Democrats. Because when you don't help them to defeat Democrats, people like President Obama that feel entitled, that have grown up in a cush living situation from day one, will allow his daughters to go to the most prominent private school in D.C., but he'll tell the other Negroes, keep out. And we shouldn't allow that. And we should speak to that. So the D.C. Voucher Program, every year the Congress has to fight to get funding for the D.C. Voucher Program. in the city of D.C. Now, here's some stats you should know. Students in the program have a 93% graduation rate compared to a 55% rate of the public school students. Why wouldn't a biracial president want minority students to attend private schools? Why? Because liberals are evil. It goes back to that. We have to start thinking in these terms. They're evil. They're sick. They have to make sure that people are held down so they're held high. They're sick. They're evil. I have no problem saying that. It's that evil philosophy. So these kids basically, as I wrote here, they're necessary casualties of liberalism. So as I mentioned, 98% of them are black and Latino. 98% of them. And the president says no. Every year they have to fight. Every single year to get that funding. Is it just for unions? That's definitely part of it, and that's probably the major part of it because he's got a lot of union donors. But ultimately, if they succeed, it defeats how liberalism looks. Do you understand? This is a president that understands image. These kids come out of that facility and they're successful. What does that do to the left? They can't succeed. He can't allow them. The left can't allow people to succeed, or they'll look bad. They need to be daddy. They need to be God. All right, so I want to make sure that I covered everything. Slavery service. Oh, the Welfare Reform Act. So let me just break this down. It's also known as the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act to defeat Democrats. So in 1996, the Welfare Reform Act came into being, and as a